Hey everybody, this is Mark.
And this is Ben, and we are Cinemagope, and this is Binge Drinking The Last of Us. I always forget, Mark, that this is a season one. Because, again, you and I have different perspectives on this show, which is great. But to me, it's almost like a completed story if it was a bleak story. Let's go over this show, Mark. I don't know the game. I mean, now I feel like I do a little bit because I've watched so many of these these little side by sides and stuff like that. But you were a player of the game, obviously. You're our resident gamer, so you know this one. So tell us a little bit about the game first.
Oh, for sure. So the TV adaptation is basically based on the original game that was made by Naughty Dog back in 2013 on the PlayStation 3. And it was very much like a standalone, complete story, right? So that's why, it's funny to call it season one, because originally, before they made a sequel years later, it really was like just a very complete, self-contained story. And it received like a lot of critical acclaim. Like, it was a fantastic narrative. You had an amazing soundtrack done for both the game and also for the TV show by Gustavo Santaolalla.
I'm loving the soundtrack of the show, dude.
Like he's an amazing guitarist. So the guitar bits that you heard, that is just 100% him, and it's straight from the original from the video game.
The more and more I find out about the show, I'm fascinated by their not just their willingness, but their determination to keep it like the game. More like anything we've ever seen as far as a video game adaptation, where it's like shot for shot remakes of scenes. You have the what's the guy's name? Neil Druckmann? Is that
Neil Druckmann was one of the he and it was Bruce Staley were the two original leads, and like he's one of the main writers for the original game.
I mean, and they bring back all the voice actors. They bring back the motion capture actors to do roles. Like, despite if anybody doesn't like this show, they cannot not give it credit for how much they were trying to keep the spirit of the game, with detracting from it, from what I can tell, because the narrative structure of a TV show is always going to be different than a first person player game, because in the game you're making your own choices. That's always going to be the difference, is you're making your own choices in the game, whereas on the show you're watching somebody make their choice, So
with this one, I would say that's like half true what you just said. Like, gameplay wise, you have the freedom to tackle, those elements as freely as you want within the space, right? But because it was a very narrative driven game, there were like cinematics that were
right.
So you had your cinematics, and also within the player space, there were like little things you could find that helped, more interactions between Joel and Ellie, reveal more about the world, or reveal more about their own little personalities, thoughts and processes, and just more interactions. It was really cool that they put in like a lot of like little cool things like that, where if you seeked it out as a player, it was there to reward you with like more character moments.
Right. And probably more options, right? Like I've heard things like some of the things you see in the show, like the rooms they're in, the buildings they're in, you can obviously you can investigate more, like go around to different things and find different. I mean, that's a game, that's a game. You have to have something to do in the game.
Yeah, it wasn't completely open world, but they did let you explore quite a little bit within each space that the story, like, drove you through, like funneled you through. But otherwise, there was they had exploration, because there was a lot of just game specific mechanics, from like crafting to finding first aid, finding ammo, finding things to help unlock doors, like that sort of stuff. But otherwise, it was it was like this kind of action survival, very narrative driven based title, and it was very, it was really popular. It was almost like very universally unanimously praised by like critics and fans. So from all those different perspectives, I think this is one of the like higher quality, really faithful adaptations, right? You don't always get those very often. Kind of like, like when I see something like this, I have to give it credit where credit's due and praise it, because to me, this is another fine example of how to do it well, versus like, say, what happened with the Witcher series, which is, breaks my heart, but they're both perfect examples of like one that did it well and one that didn't. I think they did a really good job taking like a lot of the major narrative beats and adapting them in, because obviously you had to take out a lot of the gamey parts because it wouldn't make sense, cut some things, expand on others, and then just kind of very slightly restructure it so that it can have this, 9-episode flow.
Did it keep any gaming parts that to you were like, oh man, they did that one so good? Because I felt like,
oh, absolutely, there was a ton of Easter eggs. Like boosting someone up to go higher was like a classic game puzzle. They even had one like towards one episode where you saw Joel lift up Ellie. She dropped the ladder. That was a constant thing every once in a while in the game. So it's like it was kind of like one of those, if you think of the Leo DiCaprio meme of like, so many scenes were recreated shot for shot. A lot of dialogue was line for line. And to me, it made sense that they did that because it was already done so well. Why reinvent the wheel? Like, you don't need to.
That's one of the things I really like about it, is that they didn't feel the need to. They wanted to, they got a cast that for some reason people aren't like super in love with, but I thought were great. I think maybe video game people don't like the cast as much because maybe it wasn't exactly the way the main characters in the game were. But like, as far as just watching the show, I really like the dynamic between the two leads. And even Tess in the beginning, I really like that dynamic too. It didn't go very far. And I hear there's other characters and stuff like that, like Tommy and even like Frank and Bill. Is it Bill?
Yeah, Bill and Frank, yeah.
Yeah, Bill and Frank that are kind of more involved, or at least one of Bill and Frank are more involved.
We can touch upon that. Yeah, like yeah. So like
but I think the casting from the characters I like in the show, they casted it really good. How is it with the game casting? I don't know.
When you're presented with this brand new character and they look a certain way and you've seen them look that specific way for years and years and years, it's hard to sometimes meet certain people's expectations where they're trying to like have suddenly show someone be cast and show up on a screen that's just this like twin image of a fictional character, which you can't always achieve, right? Yeah. Sometimes you may not find someone who looks that way. Maybe the best person for the part is not an exact clone, right? I mean, Pedro Pascal, the look they gave him overall with like the clothes and makeup, he came pretty close.
Pretty close, yeah.
And like the gal who played Marlene is actually her actual voice actress from the game, and she also did the mocap.
Yeah,
so that was really cool. That. Like that was we got like the Marlene. Nick Offerman as Bill was almost picture perfect, right? So they came close, right? I think the only one that was really contentious was basically Ellie.
Bella Ramsey. Bella Ramsey yeah. I think she's great in this show. I don't give a fuck what people say, like, oh, she's not a good actress. I thought she was fantastic in the show, and she had to do a lot of hard. I think as the episodes
went on, she definitely grew into it.
Yeah, I think she was supposed to be kind of the bitchy teen at first, but she grew and grew. And like
Joel and Ellie, right? They're basically the dynamic, the core, the heart of the show. Like for example, with Joel, they made him like a little bit older. He was a bit softer. He felt more worn down. But because, when you look at the original Joel, especially, and part of this is because you had to play as a guy who had to do this crazy, basically across the country mission, right? He was way more hardened. He was way more cynical. He was way more assertive. He was like, he took no shit. He was a badass, right? Because you got to see the beginning, you saw like a glimpse of what he was. And then you're playing through the game, seeing what he became after that 20-year gap. But then, of course, over the course of the time and what Ellie then brings back into his life, you do see him go through that arc. But overall, he was still this very much more just reserved, hardened, like veteran of just survivalist veteran. That's the word I'm looking for. And then Ellie's original portrayal, they definitely always had her originally designed with like, the sass and being that teenager and a little bit of defiant and stuff, but it wasn't so over the top or so pushed. When they did it with the TV show, they seemed to push that for whatever reason harder than it was from the original game, right? So TV Ellie was more brash, more defiant. She was way more overconfident. She seemed to lack as much compassion, cooperation, and naiveness as the original. Because I mean, obviously that was an arc, right? Because that Ellie grew into the Ellie that you see later, but she started in a much different place to then have that arc. Whereas some parts of the TV Ellie, it's like they just started there and they was just there the whole way, like nothing changed.
I know what you're saying, because I was thinking the same thing the first 3 episodes maybe, but I feel like they took maybe a direction with Ellie in the show where she thinks she's hardened and she thinks that she's sure of herself and stuff like that. Because you see the last I mean, there's a handful of episodes towards the end where she gets her ass handed to her and sees the harsh realities of everything, and it changes her. And Bella Ramsey's facial expression changes in those last couple of episodes. You know, the stuff that she's asked to do or the stuff that she decides to do for her own reasons. I mean, this is a spoiler thing. I mean, but like taking care of Joel after he gets stabbed, it's like that was crazy shit. And then the thing with, what was it, David?
David, yeah, the camera.
Fuck, that was gnarly. Like that was creepy and gross and intense. Like I thought she got pushed through the ringer in that one, so I was happy with that. I see what you're saying.
That was very faithful to the game too, and that really was just like this tense, creepy stuff too. And I think the cool thing about interactive media in the case of video games, that portion of the game you played as Ellie, so you were really in control of feeling that even more than just, you know, say watching it on a screen, like on a couch, right? Controller in hand, you're part of the action, and then this stuff is happening to you. It definitely really elevates that kind of storytelling.
That takes me into something I want to talk about, and I didn't have a huge problem with it. Again, you played the game, I've watched the show. Something was missing, and then I've watched these playback YouTube clips of what happens when Joel gets injured, and it's Ellie just blasting motherfuckers. Like she's killing like a whole room of people to survive because you're playing her, obviously. So for me, the show, I would have really loved 10 episodes personally. I think the final one was rushed, and I think their relationship could have grew for maybe one more episode. I feel that we were missing action scenes, and I get it, that's mostly for the games, and narratively it doesn't have to be there. But I think in the case of Ellie, when Joel gets injured, I think it should have been there that she took out those raiders. But obviously those raiders went back to David's camp, and so they couldn't have died. But I don't know, I feel like there's a little bit lack of action with fighting off raiders, and I feel like there's definitely a little bit lack of interaction with clickers or whatever, you know. I mean, that stuff is there, and I'm not saying I'm someone that needs that like through the whole thing. I don't, but I feel like there was some spots where you're like, oh, that could have been needed. I heard there was even a moment where David and Ellie, when they first meet in the game, they actually do fight off a couple clickers. I'm like, why not just do that? You know,
yeah. So I actually 100% agree with you, because a lot of folks mentioned this too, and even some of my other friends that watched this, like, you know, when we watched it, you know, too, as the episodes were being released. Yeah, like I think there could have been a little bit more balance in that, because I think it would have helped with like both some pacing and, you know, it's kind of like the classic saying, how can you have a zombie show without zombies, right? So in this case, yeah, I thought it was odd that they didn't do like even just a momentary team up of them just fighting. Like it didn't have to be a horde of clickers. It could have been just one or two before they sat down and had that little discussion where, like, you know, then David reveals like that he knows who she is, as in, you know, she was with the guy who killed one of their own. Same thing with like bandits and raiders. It was actually a really great sequence of that I had hoped that they kept in right before you first meet Henry and Sam, right, back in the a previous episode, where they stumble across, as they're making their way to Tommy's area, they came across like some real, you know, the real dangerous urban area. In this case, they made it Kansas City, and like, you know, they showed how some of humanity was really ruthless, right? A lot of the TV rewrites, they try to keep injecting like humanity back into these other characters, and including creating new ones, so that these bandits didn't come across too villainy. But to me, it's like sometimes you are going to have those kind of people in the apocalypse, right? Like when there's no laws, no nothing, there's going to be some group of people are just going to go
well crazy. Yeah, human nature still stays the same. I mean, look at the people that are still trying to make things right, or people that are still trying to rule. There's going to be people that are still trying to pillage.
And that sequence was actually pretty brutal, because you saw these guys like they commandeered like some kind of like army tank, and when you first come across them, you're hiding because they gunned down a bunch of innocents right in front of you, and you're like, oh shit, and you're trying to constantly hide and sneak by, because, you know, in the game wise, if you get caught by them, you just get gunned down and it's game over like really quick. And even an action sequence when Joel, Ellie, Sam, and Henry are running away together from this thing, right? It was kind of like the truck that they made in that one episode that said "run" on the front of like the snowplow. Right? I think that was supposed to be the homage.
Oh yeah, from four. Yeah.
But to me, I thought it was actually done better in the game. And I think one of the things that also would have added a little bit more infected, that would have kept fans happy, is instead of having this Bill and Frank story that did not exist in the game, that was completely for the TV show. The section was called Bill's Town. And it was Bill surviving on his own, because his and Frank's relationship unfortunately went downhill in the original story. Yeah, so he was still very much in that mode. and very much ornery and all that stuff. It was actually, he was a great character in that. But you also had this thing where he had everything booby trapped. There was totally infected still, in and out of the town.
Nice.
And there's this one sequence that they chose not to do because they didn't do any of this that I was so excited to see on the screen. And I told you about this before when we chatted once, where Joel accidentally trips one of the booby traps, gets hung up upside down by his foot. And in the game, it's such a tense, crazy sequence because the camera gets inverted. You're hanging there with them. A clicker heard it, comes through the door, sees him, and you're struggling to grab your gun again as you're hanging upside down trying to fire at the thing before, because if you don't do it in time, it's game over, right? Like that would have been so amazing on the show if they had done that scene shot for shot. And the trade-off too, like on its own, the Bill and Frank thing was a well-told story. But my only issue with it is it was a trade-off where if you were to take it out of the 9 episodes, it's like nothing else would have changed.
Yeah.
But the trade-off actually was that we lost the Bill, Joel, Ellie interactions and the development that all 3 characters had through that section of the game.
I like that episode a lot as a self-contained piece of like interesting drama. Like it's very sad. It's got funny moments and stuff like that. And I didn't know anything about how his character is portrayed in the game until after I watched that episode. Mm-hmm. But the whole episode, I was going like, what the fuck's going on? Like, who are these people? Their purpose, as far as Joe and Ellie's concerned, is like they left a bunch of shit for them to take, which they did not take.
Yeah, which they didn't take.
I don't understand that. Is that a game thing? Like,
no.
Joel has a whole fucking armory of weapons and he doesn't take any of it? Like,
yeah. I mean, originally Bill didn't have that kind of armory. That was new to the show.
Oh, okay.
And, but like there are
makes no sense why you wouldn't take all that shit.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make any sense either because he does help you get a vehicle, which you do, like just like in the TV show, right? It just to portray them like these aren't the best people, like they're not bad people, but they're not the best because they're still doing all these kind of things, but mostly to survive, right?
They're people of circumstance. They're
people of circumstance.
Yeah. What do you think about Anna Torv as Tess?
I think she did a pretty good job overall.
Yeah, I don't know the game, but I like her as an actress. I was a fan of Fringe, which she was on. I thought she was a pretty strong, interesting character. I don't really get her motivation for. She's in a room full of grenades, but she decides to end her own life while clickers are coming at her by trying to light a Zippo. It's like, dude, just pick up a grenade and throw it.
Yeah,
I wanted to be dramatic.
They just wrote that scene for dramatic reasons because that's actually one scene that's very different from the game because you lose Tess in a similar way, right? Where she gets bitten.
Oh, that's right. She gets killed by like people, right?
Yeah. The Fireflies were wiped out the same way, right? They never came to rendezvous with the group at that museum. They were actually killed by either Raiders or a Fedra unit.
What does it stand for? What does it stand for? What's the acronym?
Federal Disaster Response Agency.
My favorite episode is 5. 5 was just action-packed. I love Sam and Henry. It's the episode where like Joel and Ellie really become a unit, pretty much. It was the best, for obvious reasons. The ending was fucking nuts. What do they call it? Like a horde?
We got to see the glimpse of what they call a bloater.
A bloater.
Really big dude.
Yeah, the bloat, like that whole thing. And I guess the woman boss wasn't in the game. Is that true?
No. So Kathleen and her right-hand man, they're completely new characters.
It was good though. Yeah,
because that section of the game was just all nameless bandits.
Again, for narrative purposes for a television show, I guess it made sense to create sort of characters out of it. But that's my favorite episode. My second favorite is episode 1. I thought that was fucking great. And then I think my third favorite was probably 8. That was just the whole episode had me on the edge of my seat the entire time. From the time that she meets them and kills the deer, and then even when they leave, because they're coming back, and then when David smacks that girl, you're like, what is going on here in this town? And then, when she tries to fend them off, have them follow her, the whole time I was just like constantly going, oh my God.
Yeah. They had a lot of cool plants too. Like if you were paying attention to the sequence of events in episode 8, before they even brought the deer back, when they're talking about, oh, this is deer meat, it actually wasn't deer meat.
Yeah. Well, they they concentrated visually a lot in the show on the darkness and the thickness. Like I think they even say at one point, aren't you chopping that kind of big or whatever? Like I don't know.
We're thinking of concepts for the game originally. I love how they came up with a grounded, like, this could actually happen scenario with the cordyceps.
Yes. It's not some stupid, weird, made up bullshit thing. It's like, wow, it's possible.
Yeah, because it 100% happens in nature. I mean, I've seen clips and documentaries of like what it does to insects, and that's like, and it's really freaky. So I couldn't even imagine if that jumped species.
Do you have a couple favorite episodes?
Yeah, so definitely number one, because it was very, very faithful to the opening of the game, right? Like a lot of shots and dialogue were one for one, and it really got like a lot of people excited, or at least hopeful how, you know, the rest of the season would go. I also enjoyed, you know, number two, as that was really close to the game as well, where you got to see them, you know, leaving Boston.
I did like that one a lot too.
The click, you know, where you get to see your first clickers, you know, and the unfortunate loss of Tess. The Sam and Henry stuff I definitely always enjoyed in the game, and here it was pretty close. I mean, I think we could have done without like the new characters and focused more on the group. And another fun fact too is Sam was not deaf in the game originally. But like, again, it's like one of those classic things where it's trade-off, right? Where this is cool and it brings its own new set of cool like narrative bits. But at the same time, like there was like some really fun stuff between Sam and Ellie, because I think he even got a little crush on her, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And they were chatting and sharing like their love for comics and stuff. So
do you think a Henry and Sam one-off episode would have been more beneficial to the show than a Frank and Bill one-off? Because the fact that like being deaf in this world where clickers only go by sound, but you never know if you're making noise, that's fucking terrifying.
I mean, like for example, I think the two episodes, like three, so episode 3 was the Bill and Frank, and episode 7, while it did exist in the game, it was DLC, meaning digital downloadable content. It came out after the game.
Yeah,
and that was called Left Behind, the one with Ellie and Riley.
Yeah, that one kind of killed the momentum of the show a little bit.
Like maybe if those two episodes, the runtime of those two episodes had been used for like different areas of pacing, or maybe like you said, expanded a little bit on Henry and Sam before they meet Joel and Ellie, like that could have been cool, right? Like I personally probably would have preferred that, but you know.
I'm not a fan of television narratives that take entire episodes, they focus them on one thing. A lot of shows do this. They've been doing them for like 10, 15 years. It's become a thing. It kills the pacing of every show, unless you're like a 20 some odd television show, episode show, but then your show sucks anyway because you're on regular TV. I think you could have taken the Bill Frank one and the DLC one and just intercut it as flashbacks. To me, that would have made way more sense.
I mean, I think that would have been better, because if you would have chopped up the Bill and Frank stuff, then maybe we could have had time to both have this expansion on their episode, but also had a little bit of the Bill's town from the game in, right?
I think that would have been coming in. You're seeing it from 10 years ago, and then you're seeing it now. I think that would have been a great like trade off if they could have pulled that off instead. And then like, as far as the credit for the Left Behind episode, at least they put it in at the same spot the player would have come across it too. But if you remember our text back and forth, it took me a little bit to really get invested, and I think it was 4 that did that for me. It wasn't my favorite episode, obviously, but 4 was the one where I kind of got hooked on it. So let's go to the end. I was a little torn on this one, dude. Like, first of all, I thought it was too short of an episode.
I agree.
I love Ashley
Johnson. Yeah, she got to play as Ellie's mom.
Yeah, that was cool. The last episode went by really, really fast. And this is where I feel like one more episode would have really padded out how I'm supposed to feel about why Joel does what he does. I actually agree with what he does based on how the show portrayed it. The Fireflies basically betrayed him. He did what they asked him to do, and then they kind of just kicked him to the curb with no weapons. Well, first of all, he's surviving himself, and then he's saving someone else who was led to believe they were helping people, and maybe they are, but they don't know they're gonna die. I don't think he did anything wrong. Like, I really don't, because what were they gonna do with that cure anyway? Like, who even knows? I don't know.
Well, that's actually one of the things that was very good about the original ending, right? It was just such a morally ambiguous thing, right? So many people had like passionate debates about that. And I think one thing that was interesting in the game that probably made that sequence feel better as far as narrative storytelling. And I agree with you. Like, either we should have had one more episode, or just the finale could have been like the pilot, or it should have been maybe an hour and a half.
It could have been the pilot. That would have been better. Yeah.
Like an hour and a half, right?
Or something, yeah.
So I think the way they set up Joel making that decision was stronger in the game, because first of all, when they came across the Fireflies, it was very different. One thing that was missing from this is that Game Ellie had a fear of water and didn't know how to swim. So there were actually some fun game sequences where you had to get her on a pallet, which they did show a pallet at one point, and Joel has to actually like push her in water for, from one point to another if they actually had to cross deep water. So there's a sequence in the final stretch where you're approaching that hospital, and this is also after the really cool giraffe scene, which they made, shot by shot.
Very sweet.
Yeah, very nice. A lot of people were happy that was included. And that was a real giraffe that was used, I read.
I was going to say, that's the best CGI ever. That was a real giraffe?
It was a real giraffe. It has a specific name. It was from a zoo in the local area.
Oh, wow.
And then there's a scene where they're trying to cross one more area of water. And something happens to where like this strong current comes, and they get separated. And Joel's trying to save Ellie because she gets like, dunked underwater and submerged underwater for a very long time. And he finally grabs a hold of her, gets her out of the water, and he's trying to administer CPR. And that's when the fireflies came on them, knocks him out with the butt of the rifle. So once they end up in the hospital, it was much more ambiguous. Like, again, because of the narrative structure and just the way video games are, it's, you took control of Joel again. They made it much more ambiguous that doctors weren't sure, using her would work as a cure, right? They made it much more ambiguous whether this surgery was going to work, like, period. So that was kind of like more fuel for like you, the player, as Joel, to be like, well, I don't want them to kill her, because obviously they have to go into the brainstem. It was kind of interesting too, because overall, I think they made Marlene a lot more colder towards Ellie in this version, right? Like in the beginning, I always thought she was way more cold, and then here, like, the reasonings and justifications make sense, but here in the TV version, it felt like she just really didn't care that, like, and best friend's child is gonna,
That's what I was going to ask you, because they make it a point at the beginning of this episode to show that she was there when she was born, and she was a friend of the mom, and she had to kill the mom. And it seemed like she's known Ellie her entire life. Is that part of the game? Because yeah, you're right. She's kind of cold in this. It's like
I just think that part had like a bit of a narrative dissonance, right? Like the character relationships were off. The scene that they shot just didn't really match the character back in episode 1, right? So I to me that was a bit jarring, because it just wasn't consistent, right?
Marlene, you're talking about.
Yeah, like the way she was treating Ellie, like in episode 1 and 2. But I guess maybe that just wasn't caught, or maybe they were, maybe the writers were fine with that this time around. It felt like it made Joel's choice either just much more morally gray or much more easier to side with. I do say the hospital sequence, though, you finally, as far as the TV show, you finally got to see like video game Joel come to life, where who's the hardened, cunning, just survivalist suddenly woke up. The beast was woken up, and he went on his rampage.
People are calling him Punisher Joel, like he's like the Punisher, yeah, and he's a bad, Again, just from the show's perspective, a man who lost his daughter and then 20 years later has been super hardened, done terrible things, hooked up with terrible people, but is really just trying to get through. And like, for some reason, I mean, I like the little exchange that he actually did try to kill himself at one point. Taking this job from Marlene, like, here's this girl, get her across, get her to here, get her from point A to point B. And like months and months and months and adventures go by, and they escape death multiple times. They get closer. They learn about each other. They share moments. They laugh together. They save each other's lives. And then when they finally when Joel, from his perspective, when he finally reaches that goal, they throw a smoke bomb at him, because I get it. They don't know who he is. But in his mind, it's like, okay, I just got attacked. I wake up in a hospital. There's people surrounding me with guns. I just completed my goal from the people that wanted me to complete it. They're like, well, thanks for delivering this package. We're going to kill her to, quote unquote, save humanity.
Mhm.
Here's your pack and a knife, get the fuck out, and like you're just left to die basically. We're not even going to give you your gun back. I'm 100% on his side for what he did. I don't know if he needed to execute certain people, but I get why he did, because they're just going to pick up another gun and come back at him anyway. What he felt for her, he brought a humanity back to him, or she brought a humanity.
Yeah, she brought the humanity back to him.
I don't find, a lot of people are like, well, it was a selfish decision because he now sees her as his daughter. There's probably a little of that in there, but again, he doesn't know what they're going to do with this thing that they get out of her head. From what he has talked about with Fireflies, they're shady. Like, who knows if they're going to try to hold the world hostage with this thing, you know? So I don't know. I kind of agree with him. That's my take.
Actually, it's interesting too, because I remember a lot of the original comments, because like I remember after I played the game, like I would look up some thought, like I wanted to see what people's thoughts were like online, and a lot of people echoed this too. Obviously, you had the camp that was like agreed with Joel, disagreed with Joel. The interesting thing is the majority of what I could tell were parents agreed with Joel. Like if the commenter was a parent, they're like, oh yeah, I would 100% scorch earth, you know, to save my child, basically. Like,
let me ask you this: in the game, does Ellie know before she goes under that she's probably going to die? Because in the show they make it a point to kind of say that she doesn't. They kind of just lied to her and just said she's going to take a surgery.
But like you said, right, like in his eyes the world may not be worth saving. Maybe the Fireflies will use this to become, you know, to take control over the rest of humanity. How will they actually disperse this? Will it even actually work? Right, so you have all these like really great questions of, you know, what could happen one way or the other.
And if they're just going to throw him out to die after he does this huge fucking thing for them, what do they care about the rest of humanity? I mean, a little micro dose of humanity. They're just like, okay, thanks for doing this huge thing. Fuck off. Here's a knife. It's like,
I think that contributes to Joel making his like decision like even easier, right? Not just for the fact that he now sees her as a surrogate daughter, and he's like, I'm going to go get my daughter back. Like the situation he also found himself in, he was just like, fuck this, you know?
Yeah, I still think that if they said give him his car and his guns and a bunch of fresh food, I still think he would try to save her.
I guess a good way to end it too, before we go into final thoughts, is what did you think of that last dialogue exchange? Because it was really close to the game, and I remember like the first time I saw it, it was so powerful when like Ellie's like, you know, swear to me that what you told me is the truth. He goes, I swear, and then she just, you can see they animated it so well, like you could see like the thoughts in her head, the look in her eyes, and then she just kind of has that reserved like, okay, and then fade to black.
I think he should have told her the truth, because knowing the Ellie that I know from the show, she would have eventually, either immediately or eventually, come around to like, well, I appreciate that, because she loves him like a dad. If he said like, look, I woke up and they were going to kill you and you didn't have a choice in that, right? It's like, no, they were just going to, you know, put me under and cut something out. It's like, no, they were going to kill you and they were leaving me for, I don't know. I'm just like that. I would have come clean to her and just been like, dude, it was not a good situation. You know, like the story he told her was just, it was a little bit too much for her to buy. And it was, you know,
flimsy, right? Flimsy.
Yeah. It was like, well, they found a bunch of people just like you and none of it works. I'm like, oh, that's a bad lie. I think she could just sense that he was full of shit with that, you know? And Ellie clearly woke up from the original blast, because otherwise she wouldn't have known where she was. Like, clearly she woke up, they explained to her the procedure and all that stuff, because if not, Joel wouldn't need to lie to her. He would just been like, oh, we got bombed by raiders and I got you out of there, you know? But
so you're probably right. Maybe she was aware, like in both versions, of what was happening more or less, because they do make it a point of the sequel where she actually does end up, a little bit of spoiler, she does resent him for it, making that decision for her.
I think it came at you too fast. And
I agree. I think overall the season definitely had pacing issues. Like I think some stuff was too quick.
Tiny more time with Joel and Ellie, just to flesh out the father-daughter thing. It's there. It's already there. We get it. I just felt they were trying to kick us in the ass with it at the very last episode. But I will say, if we're gonna overall summarize our feelings of the show, the one thing I can say wholeheartedly is that it was extremely well produced. The set design of that show, like it was so detailed from every time they would show up, and I'm assuming the game graphics are similar. Just everywhere they show up, even this last episode where they show up with the triage tents and stuff, everything is so detailed inside. Every room they go in, like that building they go in 5, and the tunnel system. Like, I just thought nothing felt like some volume CGI bullshit. And from what I understand, they actually were shooting a lot of this stuff on location. Yeah. Especially a lot of the outside stuff in the woods. Like, that stuff goes miles when you know it's actually there, and you can see the breath coming out of people's mouths, you know.
Oh yeah, like the production design was excellent. I think like you said, they shot 99% of it like on location, and they even created like fake snow to make the snowy time in like episode 8 really, you get that feeling of like you're in a blizzard. It's really frigid, it's cold.
I'm not even the biggest Pedro Pascal guy, but I really liked him as Joel in this.
Yeah, he did a really good job too. I remember a lot of people really liked how he portrayed having that bit of anxiety attacks kind of like midway through. I saw a lot of comments saying that was very realistically done from folks who experience it. Because I think overall, I will still give the nod to the original game's narrative being the superior version. Like if I had to choose between the two, it would 100% be the original.
So thanks everyone. Thanks for watching Binge Drinking, the podcast here on CinemaGope. For CinemaGope, I'm Ben.
And I'm Mark. We drink your cinema.